Chapter 19. Theories, Fishing, and Stargazing. That day was uneventful, especially considering the previous day. It was a warm, sunny sort of day. They rode through rolling green hills, past rushing streams, and between craggy cliffs, the common Mareme terrain. A stark contrast between their previous travels in the Greywood and the Tharlinden. They came to a forest, this time a normal one. They stopped in a little clearing. They had intentions of camping there until Orgy noticed something, rather several somethings. "What are you looking at, Orgy?" Athea asked as she walked in the dragon's direction. "This looks like a recently used fire pit," Orgy muttered. He turned. "And over here are fresh imprints of tent poles. There are also some foot and paw prints." "Are you saying someone has been here?" Athea asked, slightly confused. Orgy picked something off the ground. "Yes." Athea craned her neck to see what Orgy had found. It looked like some article of jewelry, but Athea could not see it well enough to be certain. "We need to get as far away from here as possible," Orgy said, blood draining from his face. "Why?" "This." Orgy showed her the piece of jewelry, which happened to be a necklace. "This is a sign of those who are against the king, and by the looks of it they were here very recently, perhaps as recently as last night. This might be one of their meeting places." "Why do you think that?" Athea said, horrified at the thought. Orgy pointed to several trees. All bore the same mysterious marking on their bark, as was on the necklace. The mark sent shivers down the backs of both girl and dragon alike. "I do not think I want to camp here," Athea swallowed hard. "I believe it would be wise to move on to another site." When Orgy showed his findings to the others, they agreed. They mounted up and rode as far away from there as they could before the sun's golden rays turned orange and slipped down far below the horizon. The new place had no signs of anyone, besides the forest-dwelling creatures, having been there at least for a good while. This looked far more inviting than the other clearing. Ruana sat down on a log and began unwrapping the bandage that was on her arm. It was time to replace it. Alep came over and looked at it. I am not certain that I mentioned this before, but Alep did have a surprisingly good knowledge of caring for wounds, broken bones, etc., especially when you're in the woods and your access to immediate medical attention is somewhat limited. Alep raised his eyebrows. "I'm surprised how well your arm is getting. Normally it's at least another day or two before it looks like this." Ruana grinned. "That is good. I will be able to shoot arrows that much sooner, but I suppose it is due to the poultice that I put on it." Alep grinned. "Well, if that is the case, I'm surprised it does not look better than it does." Ruana grinned, then cocked her head as she thought of something. "How do you know so much about this kind of thing?" Alep hesitated a bit before answering. He really could not tell Ruana the rest of the complete reason, but he stayed as close to the truth as he could. "My mother taught me something about medicine. You know, enough to get through a wound in the woods when you don't have a skilled doctor at your disposal," he said nervously. That was as close to the truth as he could say at the moment. He would tell the full truth when they got to Crenn Riaeth, and he could not say it a second sooner. "Just put some more of this herb on it and rewrap it." He got up and walked away. Ruana cast a suspicious look in Alep's direction. "That was rather odd," she muttered. Ruana had a suspicion that Alep was not telling them everything, but she had no idea why or what he was not telling them. It must be something unusual, Ruana thought. But what? She thought back to all the conversations. All the times he had said or done something, well, out of the ordinary. All the times he had known something he just could not have known, if he was just some random country boy. There had to be something connecting all these events. "Think, Ruana, think," she muttered. But try she might, she could not give an answer that would make sense of it all. "What am I missing?" She thought and thought and thought some more. Nothing. Carrie noticed her friend's thinking face and came over. "What are you doing?" "Thinking," Ruana mumbled. "About what?" Carrie grinned. Ruana sighed. "I will not explain here. Let us go down by the river." They walked down to the river. Ruana flopped down on a log and watched the rushing river water dance between rocks, skip over fish, and glide under lily pads. "So what are you thinking?" Carrie asked, once they were obviously alone. "Alep." Being the true friend that she was, Carrie gave Ruana a playful look and raised a suspicious eyebrow. "I mean all the odd things he has said or not said. Done or not done," Ruana hastily explained, before Carrie could comment. She did not want to give the impression she was thinking anything else about the lad, though whether or not she was, remains to be seen. Carrie nodded in understanding. "Like what he did with Mr. List?" "That and his story of how he got out of jail, though that was more due to what Athea said about it. And just now. I asked him where he learned his medical skills, and he acted like he didn't want to tell me. He finally said his mother had taught him, but I could, from his mannerisms, tell there was something he is not saying." Carrie wore her listening face. Strange. Alep was walking through the forest near them. He was close enough to hear their conversation. He stopped and ducked behind a tree, hearing everything. And I was thinking about what it could have been when you walked up. A spy? I thought of that, but I doubt it. Why? He never asked odd or personal questions beyond the normal. And I've never seen him snoop through our things or anything like that. And why would a spy be interested in a small group of teens? True, Carrie's expression darkened. Except that we are going to Crenn Riaeth. Still, we're only one small group, when there are likely many others, Ruana pointed out. Look, I do not want him to be a spy or something of that ilk any more than you do. But maybe he knows something about us we might not even know, Carrie suggested. Ruana gave a sideways look at her friend. Like what? Carrie cocked her head. I do not know, but if he does, it is certainly something big. But how could a random country boy just know that, or anything about us? He might not just be some random country boy. Ruana sat up straight. It was rather obvious, but she had not thought of that explanation. Then what is he? Carrie shrugged. I do not know, but I think it is wise to at least keep an eye on him, at least for the time being, or until more information surfaces. Ruana sighed. Agreed. Alep, hearing the conversation ending, stayed behind the tree for a few more moments before stepping out. He wanted it to appear like he had just arrived. Alep, Ruana said, surprised. What are you doing here? He nodded to his fishing pole and smirked. Catching rabbits. Ruana caught his sarcasm and ran with it. I did not know you could catch rabbits with a fishing pole. I'm talented like that. Carrie inwardly groaned. She grabbed Ruana's arm and began to pull her. Have fun catching rabbits with a fishing pole, Carrie called. Ruana jerked her arm from Carrie's grasp. What happened to keep an eye on him? Carrie whispered. Ruana shrugged. I can do that still like normal. Carrie sighed but gave no response. Alep's mind raced. Am I close to being discovered? What will the others think if they knew? Surely something would change. He threw his line back in the stream. Well, we're almost to Crenn Riaeth. Hopefully nothing will happen before then. Nothing has ever happened when I've joined others on the way to Crenn Riaeth. His line began to bow. He pulled on it, and a fish swung on the end of the line. He carefully pried the hook out of his mouth and dropped the fish next to the others. He recast the line and started to whistle a merry little tune, continuing to think. Ruana and Carrie continued to discuss Alep as they made their way back to camp. Each felt like they were getting nowhere. None of their ideas could fully explain all Alep did or said. Maybe we should just pause this conversation, Ruana suggested. We're almost back to camp. Let us talk about it later. I'm not sure I want the others to know. Not yet. Carrie agreed, and the conversation ceased. A few minutes later, Corbett walked by, also carrying a fishing pole. Are you going fishing? Carrie asked. She had never seen her brother show an interest in that activity. Yes. Why? He shrugged. I'm bored and it's something to do. As you wish, Carrie said, clearly thinking it odd. They kept moving until they were back at camp. Corbett ducked, barely missing a low-hanging branch. That will wake one up, he thought, and continued down the forest path to the river. He stopped, surprised. Alep was sitting there, with at least 7 fish. How did you catch so many fish so fast? Corbett asked. Alep shrugged. I suppose the fish are biting. Corbett sat down on a rock a few feet away. He threw in the line. A few more minutes passed. Alep reeled in another 2 fish. Corbett was yet to catch so much as a measly sardine. Corbett opened his mouth and closed it. Alep noticed, threw in his reel, and asked, Are you going to say something? Corbett hesitated. I need to tell you why I was a bit reluctant to let you join our group. Alep raised an eyebrow. Why? Corbett took a deep breath. Well, about... He scrunched up his face, thinking. 2 years ago. Yes, 2 years ago. Kiplar had a series of break-ins. They finally caught the person who did it. I saw the person, and well, he looked a lot like you. Alep nodded. And you think I was that person? Corbett looked chagrined. Well, yes. Alep leaned back. So am I? No, Corbett exhaled. I see that now. Alep grinned. I'm glad to know I'm not a thief. Corbett chuckled. Suddenly Corbett's line bowed, and he also reeled in fish. By the time they stopped for the day, they each had many fish. Corbett and Alep walked through the woods, each holding a bag full of fish. They were laughing and joking like the oldest of friends. The others stared at the stark difference in how Alep and Corbett interacted. What happened between the two of you? Ruana questioned, shocked. Alep and Corbett looked at each other and realized how different they were acting. I suppose we made up, Alep grinned. What is in your bags? Orgy asked as he got a whiff of fish. Fish, Corbett answered. Orgy rubbed his hands, or claws, together. He loved fish. Would you like me to prepare it? I know a delicious recipe. Corbett tossed the bag in Orgy's direction. Knock yourself out. Just be sure to clean the fish before you do anything. Orgy feigned offense. Well, I would never do that. Corbett raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? Orgy smirked. To anyone's fish but yours. At this, everyone burst out laughing. They'd been trying to not laugh at Orgy's and Corbett's conversation, but Orgy's last snark had now made that impossible. Orgy made a delicious dinner from the fish. In fact, it was so good, everyone decided to make Orgy their official chef. The dragon was a bit embarrassed, but secretly was pleased. Except for Orgy and perhaps a few select others, though I'm afraid I do not know who they are. Dragons are not particularly skilled in the kitchen, despite the fact that they do love good food. After dinner, they sat around a campfire, simply talking about nothing. It was great fun, and it ended all too soon, as nearly all become quite sleepy. The group, with the exception of Ruana, went to bed. She stayed awake stargazing. This night was a new moon and a cloudless one, therefore a beautiful night to look at the stars. There was a horse, Ruana muttered, as she stared at the night sky. The bird, the archer. The archer was understandably her favorite constellation. She continued to rattle off the names of the constellations, as she had done ever since she was a little girl. Alep could not sleep. He had much on his mind after hearing Ruana and Carrie's conversation. He decided to find something to read. Anything to take his mind off that, even for a brief moment. He went to Orgy's box of books, which had a significant amount of the scholarly books that had been written in Mareme. Alep preferred novels to treatises, but they were still a distraction. Orgy, Alep whisper-shouted, may I read one of your books? My favorite is the one about the purple pine trees with the orange acorns, Orgy mumbled in his sleep, with his head in the air. After saying this, his head came crashing down. Remarkably, he did not wake up. This, of course, was not his favorite book. There is no such book in Orgy's book box, if there is one such in Mareme. Alep could not help but snicker. I will take that as a yes. He rummaged through the box of books until he found one. This might be interesting. It was a book on name, meaning, and origin. He knew what his name meant, but he was curious about what the names of the others meant. Ruana saw him and walked over. Is that a good book? Ruana asked. Alep shrugged. There's a list of names and meanings. It was the first book that looked interesting. I would much rather be reading a fiction book, but that genre is unfortunately lacking in Orgy's book box. What does your name mean? Alep grinned. Mighty warrior prince. Ruana raised an eyebrow. So we were traveling with royalty and did not know it? If only Ruana knew, Alep thought. I'm not sure if my parents were aware of the name's meaning when I received it, he said with a grin. Can I see it? Ruana asked, then said with a laugh. Perhaps we will discover that both of us are royal. Of course. Alep handed the book to Ruana, who flipped to the R names. She laughed. My name means wild desert rose. Alep grinned. That fits. She snorted. Well, the wild desert part does. She handed the book back to Alep. I was thinking of Rose, Alep said, softly. Ruana turned as red as a flower. The thorns or the flower? Ruana smirked. Oh, both, really. Alep also smirked. The smirk faded as his blue eyes met hers. But more the flower. Ruana, who was surprised to say the least, said the only thing she could think of to say. What does Orgy's name mean? Alep flipped to the O names. He laughed. Lover of fish. Ruana stared. You jest. Alep grinned. I am. It means powerful one. Ruana cocked her head. Lover of fish fits him better than powerful one. Alep nodded. He is getting there. Slowly. Very slowly. Very, very slowly. Ruana smirked. There's a lot of varies. Alep's mouth morphed into a sly grin. Though I'd rather be the reverse, Corbett has rubbed off on me. They looked at each other for a moment before bursting out in laughter. What are those constellations? Alep asked. Ruana launched into a minor lecture on identifying constellations. That is all the visible summer constellations. There are others, but you cannot see them until after midnight, Ruana concluded her little impromptu talk. Alep nodded. His understanding of stars was somewhat limited. He did find them interesting to look at, but not to study. He yawned. I think I will turn in. Stars are interesting, but right now sleep is more interesting. Sleep suddenly tugged on Ruana's eyelids. Right now, I think I agree. Surprisingly, all awoke early, and they broke camp by 9 a.m. That day and the following week was uneventful. The most exciting thing was Ruana hitting the ring around the bullseye. Corbett had a good laugh, despite the misfire being at night. He teased Ruana about it the rest of the trip, and for a good while after. Corbett was not the sort of person that let you live such things down. The next notable excitement came the following week, when Orgy noticed they were only a week's travel away from Crenn Riaeth. They were thrilled that they were almost there. But they were sad that their adventures were ending, for surely in Crenn Riaeth, life would go back to what was normal for their age. Or so they thought. Chapter 20. The final week. I wonder if anything exciting will happen today, Ruana thought, as she crawled out of her sleeping bag. It has been a week since anything really interesting happened. There will be, but I shall tell that when it happens. Ruana began to roll up her sleeping bag. She quickly completed this task and moved on to packing up the few belongings she had removed from her bag the previous night. She emerged from the tent, the 2 bags in hand. These she dropped on the ground and began to tear down her tent. "Good morning, Ruana," Athea greeted. She had her tent in its bag already and began to help Ruana with hers. "Hello," Ruana said, with hints of sleepiness in her voice. Together they got the tent down quickly. Ruana put her bags on Maya, afterwards wolfing down breakfast. All the others, apart from Carrie, were ready to go. Carrie had just started to pack her belongings. Once Carrie was ready, they set out with a new adventure in store. Orgy and Scalene had flown ahead and were coming back for a landing. "There's a small troop of enemy soldiers in that direction," Orgy blurted. Fear ran through the group. "How many?" Alep questioned, trying to keep his cool. "There were about 20, Scalene replied, with no small amount of concern. Though most of them had skill in weaponry, they still numbered much less than the enemy. "Which way did they head?" Alep asked. Orgy cocked his head and pointed in the opposite direction they were facing. "South. It is likely they will encounter us." "We have to fight," Tolan said, his hand reaching for his blade. Orgy nodded grimly. "If they see us, that is an almost certainty." "Keep your weapons drawn," Alep ordered. "If they want to fight, we shall be ready." The words were scarcely out of his mouth before the enemy soldiers emerged from the woods. 2 arrows flew from the bows of Ruana and Athea, mortally wounding 2 of the soldiers. The dragons took off in flight, swooping down upon the enemy. Someone yelled, "Charge!" Those with swords charged ahead, slicing like mad. Within minutes, it was all over. Those who followed the king claimed victory. The clash of swords sent sparks into the sky. Oddly enough, there was no sound of metal on metal. Alep was battling a dark figure with black armor and a dark cloak, but the detail etched on Ruana's mind was a necklace that bounced on the figure's neck. It was just like the one Orgy found in that clearing a week ago. Suddenly, in one swift motion, the figure knocked Alep's sword out of his hand. They seemed to be saying something that Ruana could not make out. But whatever Alep said apparently angered the figure because he knocked Alep to the ground. Time seemed to shift into slow motion as Alep tumbled to the ground. He looked right into Ruana's eyes with a look of bravery. No regrets. And even love? He hit the ground and time went back to normal. Ruana screamed as the figure sent his sword crashing into Alep. The figure slowly walked toward Ruana, sword drawn. She was paralyzed from fear. Her only thought was to run, run, run. But she could not move, much less run. The figure was a sword's distance away from her. "And now you join the boy," the figure said, his sword finding Ruana's heart. Ruana woke in a cold sweat. "Just a dream," she whispered as she lay back down. "Just a dream." Ruana was a bit distracted as she saddled Maya up. "What is wrong?" Alep asked. "What?" Ruana stared blankly at him. "You've been acting odd all morning." Ruana sighed. "I suppose it was a dream. Well, more of a nightmare I had last night." "What was it about?" "I dreamed you were sword fighting a person wearing dark clothes and armor, and the person, killed you. And me." Ruana said the last part sheepishly. Alep's eyes widened. He knew people who followed the king sometimes had dreams that told of what would happen in the future, but it had been centuries since the last of the dreamers had died. "Surely it is not that, but I have not the skill to know the answer," Alep thought. "What did the other person look like?" he said urgently. Ruana shrugged. "I do not recall the face. All I particularly remember was a black armor and a dark cloak. And I do recall seeing the person wearing a necklace, like the one Orgy found in that clearing in the woods a few weeks ago," Ruana added. Alep nodded and turned to walk away. Confused by this, Ruana called out, "Where are you going?" Alep stopped dead in his tracks. "I just need to think." And even more confused, Ruana asked, "About what?" Alep turned and looked right into her green eyes. "Your dream." "Why?" I have heard of people following the king who have dreams of the future." Ruana swallowed. "You do not think that my dream will—" "I do not know. But I will be on my guard for a while. Especially if I see any dark figures in a dark cloak and armor," Alep smiled, trying to make the last part light. But his hand strayed to the sword hilt. He walked back over to the set and continued saddling the horse. And he and Ruana alike hoped that dream never came true. In contrast with how the day started, at least for Ruana, the rest of the day was a normal, uneventful one. They found a campsite and spent the night. The next day was spent riding through the lovely Mareme countryside. This area of Mareme was sparsely populated, so they only saw a couple of small farms. One, however, proved to be quite interesting. It was abandoned. The barn and house were in complete shambles. No telling how long it had been that way. Scalene decided to do a little investigating and found a necklace. It was not a design of the enemy, but of the king. "Look at this." Scalene held up a gold necklace that glistened in the sunlight. The rest gathered around and stared at the piece of jewelry. "May I examine it?" Origi requested. He held it up in the midday sun, mumbling something the others could not make out. It was likely his examination of the marks of the necklace, if it were indeed that. I believe they would have been glad they could not hear Origi's words. "It is of the king." "So does that mean whoever lived here followed the king?" Carrie asked. "Not necessarily, but at least someone has been here who follows the king," Origi replied, still staring at it. Alep, who was closest to Origi, caught a glimpse of it. "It is a very old design. The thing that is the most interesting is the fact that it is one of the first designs that was made for a necklace like this," Origi lectured, unknowingly voicing Alep's thoughts. "So how do you know all that?" Corbett asked. Origi reached into his book bag and rummaged through it. He drew out a book and handed it to Corbett. "A book? How else?" Corbett said, with no small amount of sarcasm. Origi rambled on for a few more minutes about the rarity and significance of the find, ignoring Corbett's comment. Once he noticed the others were losing interest in the necklace, he ceased talking. Alep was walking around and picked up a paper. He showed it to the others and said in a confused tone, "It's a picture of my mother." "How did that get here?" Thea asked, surprised. Alep shrugged. "She was from around here. I suppose this was a family farm or something of that nature." Scalene peered at the photo. "You have her eyes." Alep gave a sad smile. "So I have heard." He put the picture in his bag and walked to his horse. "Are we going to stand around here or get a little further down the road?" Everyone thought it a little strange that Alep did not want to look around a little more, but by now they were used to Alep doing odd things. They mounted the horses and set out. They made camp about a couple of hours' ride from the broken-down house. I do not think they really wanted to spend the night next to a wrecked house, even if it was a dwelling place of Alep's ancestors. Not much happened that night. They set off again the next morning. The countryside was made of little hills covered in tall green grass that swayed in the light breeze. Other than the occasional bird or squirrel, they saw no life, be it animal or human. It was an odd land, beautiful and peaceful, true, but almost completely devoid of life, save for their presence. It seemed going through it there was no end to the little green hills. But once they came to the end of the rolling mounds, it seemed like they had only traveled through it for a minute. They came upon a forest. It was a welcome relief to get out of the summer sun. As forests go, it was a small one. They went through it in a couple hours. The sun began to set, and they made yet another camp. "See anything, Origi?" Ruana shouted. "Nothing save the grassy hills." The dragon came in for a landing. I suppose that forest was just an island of trees in a vast ocean of rolling hills. "Good line," Athea complimented. "Thank you." Ruana sighed. It might be more than 2 days if Origi could just see hills. Scalene landed next to Ruana. "Listen, I saw stone walls that way." She pointed on the dirt road. "No more than a day's ride. They must be the walls of Crenn Riaeth." A rush of excitement went through the little group. They were almost there. It was the last night of this little adventure, Ruana thought. It was a bittersweet thought. Suddenly a low growl came from the outside of her tent. A sly grin grew on her face. It's time for one last adventure. She grabbed her bow and arrows and went outside. There stood a massive black wolf. It slowly slinked towards her, snarling. She let fly an arrow. The wolf escaped, injured, into the woods. "It was so easy. Kill the little brats and escape without so much as a howl," said the dark figure, looking at the blade of his knife. "Yet you could not do it. And this after your utter failure at the great river." "I tried, my master," cried the wolf. "Clearly not hard enough. This was your last chance." The figure threw a knife at the wolf. It fell dead on the cold, hard stone of the fortress. The figure laughed a bone-chilling laugh. "Let this fool's disobedience be an example to all who follow me." Chapter 21. Crenn Riaeth, at last. That day seemed to crawl by, but when they got to the border, it seemed like they had only broke camp a minute ago. The massive wooden gates towered above them, guarding the way into Crenn Riaeth, their shining metal armor contrasting with the ancient timber gates. "Hail, friends of the king," one of the soldiers said. "Hail, soldiers of the king," Alep knew their correct response. "Your letter, please," one soldier requested. Ruana rummaged through her satchel and pulled out the letter. "Everything appears to be in order," the soldier said after reading the letter. "Welcome to the land of the king." The boatman will be along short. Oh, well, here he is now, the other soldier spoke up. As they passed, the soldiers nodded to Alep. They climbed on the boat. It took a little persuasion to make the horses board. Welcome aboard, the boatman said. He had brown hair and knowing brown eyes. He wore the brightly colored clothes that were so common in that happy land. And welcome to Crenn Riaeth. He gave a slight nod to Alep. He propelled the wooden boat through the clear blue water. It was a fairly short ride across the West York River. The boatman pushed into the dock. Farewell, new followers of the king. They walked out the boat and continued on toward the city. It was a walled city with high stone walls. An envoy of people dressed in fine, colorful clothes was headed towards them. Welcome, newcomers, to the land of the king, the people said in unison. Come this way. Ruana spoke up. Where are we going? The one Ruana suspected was the leader of the group turned towards her and replied, Why, to see the king, of course. They made their way through the land until they stood at Bryn Gaeth, the primary castle of King Alinor. The wooden gates were opened and they entered. The dragons had gone to the dragon house, as both of them could not fit inside the throne room. They passed through the castle, and before they knew it, stood in the throne room. King Alinor sat on the grand throne, which was placed on a raised platform. Next to him sat Queen Tywin. Strangely enough, Alinor looked rather like an older version of Alep, only with warm brown eyes instead of Alep's deep blue eyes. Welcome, Ruana, Ciari, and Athea. Welcome, Alep, Corbeth, and Tolan, said King Alinor, with a grandeur only a king could use. He wore rich crimson, ivory, and gold velvet clothes that were complemented with a crown of the same colors. He clapped his hands and a door opened. With the exception of Alep's, there stood each one's family. All took off running towards their families. There were bear hugs all around. Corbett tried to escape with handshakes and a hello, but his parents overruled that. Athea's father was there. He had been in Crenn Riaeth on business. All received family greetings except Alep. His father sat on the throne. Alep, the king and queen exclaimed at the same time. Father, mother, Alep said as he ran to the throne. He hugged both of his parents. All stared with mouth agape as they realized Alep was the son of the king. Ruana was not sure if she was happy that they had been traveling with the son of the king, or mad that he had not told them. And now a feast, King Alinor announced. We have much to celebrate. Suddenly a little girl, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, ran out. She wore a fine royal blue dress with gold trim. Her blonde hair was twisted in a braid. Her bright eyes were the color of sapphires. She flung her little arms around Alep and exclaimed, I'm glad you're back, brother. As am I, Malia, Alep replied. Malia turned and noticed the rest gathered there, and she half hid behind her brother. Who are they? She said, her head peeping out from behind Alep's arm. Alep grinned as he replied, They are the newest residents of Crenn Riaeth. Alep knocked on a door, and a muffled voice inside said, Hold your horses, I'm coming. Perhaps not as fast as I once could, but I am. The door opened, and there stood a kindly-looking old man. He had silvery gray hair and knowing brown eyes. His garb was not showy. In fact, it was rather common. Gray and brown were the dominant hues. A smile broke out on his wrinkled face once he saw his guest. Prince Alep, welcome back. Come in, the old man said, waving his hand. Alep stepped inside the room. It was simple, yet had a feeling of home. It contained wooden furniture, a bed, a deerskin rug, and a single lantern that illuminated the whole room. I would have been prepared for your visit, but I had not heard of your return. How was it this time? Alep grinned at the old man, who was the closest thing he had to a grandfather. Good to see you, Alep. I could give you the whole account if you have time. For you, my prince, of course. Loap leaned back in his chair. Tell me everything. Alep did, and for the next hour or so Loap listened, taking mental note of everything, especially the way Alep spoke of Ruana. Quite a tale, my prince. It is good you are back in one piece, Loap chuckled. But Alep could tell the old man was more concerned for him than he let on. Alep, would you like to read my latest work? Of course. Loap picked up a scroll and tossed it to Alep. He caught it and began to read. Loap shuffled over to his table and picked up a pen and continued to write. Alep walked over and handed the scroll back to Loap. Magnificent, as always. All the praise to the prince-sayer, Loap replied. He added playfully, Scoot, I have more writing to do. I needed to prepare for the feast anyway, Alep grinned, but stood and headed towards the door. I'm looking forward to it. A sly grin grew across Loap's wrinkled face. You say that as if I write anything worth reading. I just hope what comes from my meager pen helps others follow the pen-sayer. A knowing look appeared on Alip's face. It does, my friend. It does. The feast, as is the course for all feasts in Bryn Riaeth, was a grand one. The king's banquets had a high reputation. Musicians played cheerful exciting festival songs. People laughed and talked. Festive decorations and manners adorned the walls. It was a magnificent party. Ruana sat down with a full plate. She ate in silence for a moment as she waited for Carrie. Carrie had gotten caught up at the dessert table. "Is the seat empty?" It was Alep. "Yes, until Carrie arrives. She stopped at the cheesecakes," Ruana replied. She remembered who she was addressing and added, "Your Highness." "It is Alep," he said, sitting down. He grinned. "Are you surprised?" Ruana nodded. Surprised, shocked, stunned. She cocked her head. "But why did you not tell her sooner?" "I was not allowed to. Father usually sends someone as a guide to help those on the journey. But he prefers to keep our identities hidden," Alep replied. "Though I'm a bit surprised he sent me. It is somewhat uncommon for me to go. It usually means that at least one of you is fated to do something significant." "Hello, Alep," Carrie said as she approached. Her eyes widened. "Your Highness." "Alep, please. There is no need for such formalities with this prince." He got up and Carrie sat down. Someone across the room called for Alep, and he walked off. Ruana thought the voice sounded suspiciously like Corbeth. "Can you believe that about Alep?" Carrie asked, wide-eyed. Ruana paused before answering. "I am very surprised. I was suspicious that he was not telling us something, but I would have never guessed it was something so important." Carrie nodded. She appeared behind Ruana with a look of surprise, horror on her face. "What are you looking at?" Ruana asked. "Look," Carrie pointed. Ruana turned to see Alep, Corbeth, and Tolan doing a jig with a song plate. People were starting to gather around them, clapping with the music. Some even joined in the dancing. Athea looked on, laughing. Once she stopped laughing, she also joined. Carrie started to shrink down in her seat. "Please tell me that is not my brother." "It is," Ruana grinned. "There's only one thing to do." "What?" "Join in." Carrie sighed, but ever-faithful Carrie got up and followed her friend. They wove their way through the growing crowd. There was always a large crowd at any of the king's feasts. They found Athea and joined in. "So whose idea was this?" Ruana inquired. Athea gave a guilty grin. "You're looking at her." "I thought for sure it was Corbeth," Ruana replied. "Well, this time it was me," Athea said, with a twinkle in her blue eyes. Their impromptu jig continued until the song ceased. The crowd dispersed until it was only Ruana and company standing around. They spent the rest of that evening together, eating, chatting, laughing, and dancing until the stars shone down above them. "How much further is it?" Ruana asked. Larky was not with them, as Rudamel, Ruana's father, had taken the dog to their home. Though her father was far from the most emotional, Ruana could tell he was thrilled about having the dog. "It is not far off," her father stoically answered, as he usually did. The feast had ended, and they were going to their house, somewhere in the countryside around Bringaith. They walked a short distance more, and they had arrived. It was difficult to make out much by the moonlight. It was obviously a sizable country manor. It almost seemed too large for the father and daughter. "Why is it so big?" Ruana asked as they entered. Rudamel sighed. "I knew you would ask that. I will explain tomorrow. It would take far too long at this late hour. Your room is this way." Ruana entered the room. It was filled only with simple bedroom furniture. "I had little time to decorate, as I'm sure you can tell," Rudamel said, with a slight grin. He was not very apt at decorating, especially when it came to another's room. "I suppose that can be remedied tomorrow. But now I'll let you sleep. Good night, daughter." "Good night, father," Ruana called as her father left. She climbed in bed, happy to be in Crenn Riaeth, and to be reunited with her father, but she could hardly have guessed what the next few days would bring.